Okay, welcome back, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi there, Lan. I see you. How's it going? No worries. Just got 1 minute or less than a minute, actually, until it's class time. So everybody here so far, welcome back. Just get comfortable, and we'll be starting in just a few seconds here. Hey, Philip, good to see you there. Hello there. Hi, guys. Good to see everybody. Welcome back. Okay, it's more or less now 2:20, so I'm going to let us get started. Further members are going to trickle in over the first few minutes, so I'm aware of that. But welcome to you that are here already. I see some of you have already commented, and if you haven't yet, as usual, do make sure to type in a comment at some point so that I can get my informal attendance record logged. But anyway, welcome back. So last week we had a meeting on Tuesday, and then we had a day off on Thursday for Flex Day. I had to be attending faculty development Zoom meetings and stuff for OCC on Thursday, so no class, but now we're back. On Sunday night, I delivered to you guys an announcement through Canvas. Let me know, have any of you guys been able to check out that message and you noticed it? Let me just see if you can confirm, just making sure that that was okay. Hey Nathan, good to see you. Yeah, it's been a good week so far for the most part. Can't complain. It's starting to get warm, so I always like that. But yes, okay, good. Thanks, guys. So I sent that message out, and here I'll just mention a few things that are in it. First of all, there were some videos, supplemental videos to help add context to the lecture that we had on the Zimbardo and the Milgram experiments. So if you want to see some of the original documentary footage, which I think is very good for your knowledge and to comprehend the case with a little more clarity and vividness, then you would go ahead and look at some of those videos. So I mailed you the documentary footage of the Milgram study, the Zimbardo study, and then some commentary on the Zimbardo study as a supplement to it. So those are some videos that you can look at to gain further insight into the social psychology experiments. Then I said that, I finished grading the first homework assignment that you guys just submitted last week. So those have been graded. I told members of the class that if you want your score on it, just email me and request your individual score, and I'll give you back a response within 48 hours with your score and whatever comments. I also distributed the answer key to the first homework, so you can go to your homework assignment and compare it to the answer key and see if there are any differences and errors there. But of course, many people will probably want to know their actual individual score. My policy, though, is that I just want students to send me emails to get those scores. I don't post them on like any kind of forum that is available to you in any other way. I have my own physical and electronic records, and I don't like to put the student grades in the Canvas or anything in a grade book because there's the possibility of lost data, security issues. So I just want people to come to me directly. Plus, I also think it helps you to establish a line of communication and contact with me. So just letting you know, anytime you want the score from the first homework, feel free to email me, and I'll get you your answer within 2 days. Let's see, the next thing that's coming up is the quiz this Thursday. The quiz is on all the material up till now, up till the end of today's meeting. So it has to do with the Chapter 8, Chapter 7, and Chapter 1 topics. When we take the quiz on Thursday, and I'll send another follow-up message through Canvas after this to make sure you have it in writing, but basically, you just have to receive the quiz form, and I'm going to send it as a Canvas message at 2:20, so you'll be given the message at that time. It'll have the quiz form blank, and then all you have to do is fill in the answers to those questions on the form and send them back to me before the expiration of the class period, which is 3:45 p.m. So that's our plan for Thursday, the next meeting. When we have quizzes in this class and midterm exam, final exam, there's no other class meeting. So there will not be a lecture or a live stream on Thursday, just the quiz. But do be ready to take it at 2:20. It'll show up in your inbox for your OCC email account. And then you'll just return the answers back to me before the end of the class period. If you want, you can ask for your score on that, but it'll take a few days for me to grade. So I'll notify you over the weekend or sometime during next week when those grades are ready, and then you can check for me. to get them. Okay, and good to see all you guys. I see everyone showing up, so appreciate your attendance as always. Separate, unrelated issue. Have any of you guys heard about this stuff about Tiger Woods today? Anybody? Let me know in the chat if you have, or if you're hearing it from me. Just a curious question. Some news of the day. No, you don't know? Okay, well, some seem to know and some don't. But to those who haven't heard, Tiger Woods was involved in a pretty bad car accident today. Yes, he suffered significant critical injuries, I guess, to his legs and everything. So who knows? Hopefully he will survive. I think his golf career is definitely done. But yeah, serious accident. I mean, if you look at the photos of the aerial footage of the car itself, is that, I mean, the whole engine block area is crushed, and to your lower extremities, it looked like that would have been pretty badly hurt. So the reports are that he's in surgery and he's at UCLA Medical Center. It was just here in Southern California. He was driving along Hawthorne over in Palos Verdes. He went too fast. He crashed through a center divider, and there's a big accident scene. But he's alive, I guess. He's just really badly hurt. So Tiger Woods, great golfer, great American golfer. He's had some problems behind the wheel, I guess, in the past, right? He hit a fire hydrant when he was backing out from his house back in 2009, and he was in a DUI, I think, in 2017. Looking back, you just kind of wish, why wouldn't this man have gotten a driver or some kind of chauffeur? I mean, he's got enough money, but sad to say. Hopefully he does better and he can recover. Anyways, guys, just throwing that out there, you know, on this day. Sometimes big celebrities and athletes, we tend to pay attention, I guess, when these things happen. But anyways, I digress. Okay, so cool. So just a reminder, you have your quiz coming on Thursday. Today, the meeting is all about finishing up Chapter 1. We have more notes on Chapter 1, so we want to try to get through as many of them as we can. Then you have the quiz Thursday. And then going into next week, we're starting on Chapter 3, and that's another chapter of the book. Okay, so cool. Coming back then to Chapter 1. So Chapter 1 started with the discussion of those famous social psychology experiments. So just a brief word on those as review. There was the Milgram Study. This was supervised by the researcher Stanley Milgram at Yale University in the early 1960s. They were concerned with the question, how obedient are people to authority, even when the authority figures are asking them to do things that are clearly wrong? Part of the inspiration for designing the study was the events of World War II and the Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. Many of those officers that were executed in the Nuremberg trials were trying to defend themselves by saying they were just following orders. So people were curious, how widespread is the tendency to just follow orders, even if the orders are terrible and clearly wrong? So in the study, the subjects were divided into the role of teacher or learner. The learner they said that the learner has to try and memorize word pairs. And for the teacher, they would give a shock every time the learner got a word memorization question wrong. Now, in fact, the learner was not really getting shocked. They were in on the experiment, and they were playing along with the researcher, but the teacher didn't know that. So the teacher who is being asked to deliver these shocks hears the learner screaming, and after a while, as the shocks keep getting more intense with each new voltage, they start protesting and demanding to be let go, that they can't handle it, that the pain is too severe. If you watch the footage, which you should watch, at a certain point in the shocking procedure, they even stop talking completely. So it's like, is the person dead? Or are they even alive? How would the teacher know? But how far will the teacher go as the researcher keeps commanding them to continue despite the protests and evident screams of pain from the so-called learner? In the end, the results were kind of disappointing because 2/3 of the subjects that were teachers gave all the shocks all the way to the 450 volt level, but there was a healthy minority of about 35% or so that were able to refuse. And those people showed better critical thinking ability, the ability to give reasons and effectively communicate their reasons for refusal. So we want to be the kind of good critical thinkers that can step up and resist authority if and when it's necessary and appropriate. And so that's the lesson of that experiment. There's also the Zimbardo experiment. Sometimes that's referred to as the Stanford Prison Experiment. In that one, we had prisoners and guards in a simulated prison. Those were the volunteers and the roles they were assigned to play. It was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but it had to be shut down after just 6 days because those that were acting as prison guards started to become abusive, vindictive and sadistic towards the people in the role of prisoner. Some of them were dropping out due to overwhelming post-traumatic stress and anxiety by being put in the situation. The point of that was to see how people will respond when they're placed in a social scenario where some people have total control and others are powerless, and loose oversight given to those that have all the power. And it did devolve into kind of madness and abuse after just a few short days. So it showed us again that many, if not most of us, have powerful incentives towards bad and deviant behavior just beneath the surface if we don't think critically about what we're doing and why. So we want to be good critical thinkers so that we don't lapse into that kind of behavior, and so that we can give credible reasons for our refusal to follow the directives of a malicious or malevolent authority figure. Okay, after that, we started to talk about the stages of the critical thinking process. Didn't we talk about that, guys, where I said there's dualism, relativism, and commitment? Let me know if you remember that from either your notes or memory. And that's just a question I have, because I think that we did. Okay, good. Thanks, Lan. So there's 3 stages of cognitive development. Cognitive development overall is the lifelong process of acquiring intelligence and problem-solving ability. And psychologist and researcher William Perry Jr. studied the stages of this. He thought there were 3 of them, to be exact. The first he calls dualism, which is the stage where you basically think truth is all black and white, and authority figures have the answers to all the questions. And the second stage is relativism, where instead of that, you now think that truth is all subjective and relative to personal opinion. So no one should criticize any of these opinions because they're all equally valid. Finally, though, you get to the third stage, which is commitment. The problem with relativism is that, yes, everyone has their own different opinions, but they're not all equally justified. A person whose opinion is that the earth is flat doesn't have the same solid, good, credible evidence that a person whose opinion is that it is a sphere. So just because opinions can be of diverse views doesn't mean that they're all equally legitimate. So you reach the stage of commitment, which is the highest one. That's where you start to commit to your own views based on reason and the best available evidence. But unlike the dualist, you don't just think other people will find out these answers for me. You think that you're a competent enough judge to weigh the evidence and come up with your own view. But unlike the relativist, you don't just think that your own view is just subjective to yourself, but that you can actually get to the actual objective truth. Okay, so after that, I guess we started to talk about the different qualities of a good critical thinker. Not to worry, I see you guys showing up and it's all good. Thanks for being here. I know sometimes it takes a few minutes to arrive, but it's all right. I'm just doing review for now of the topics from last time. And in a moment, we're going to start to create new notes on this board. Qualities of a good critical thinker. That was the next thing to be mentioned. So I'll create that heading here. Okay, so to those who've taken good notes or just have strong memories, or both, how many of these qualities did we discuss? If you could let me know the items that we went through. I believe we talked about analytical skills. Did we also do effective communication and inquiry skills? I think we have those 3. So if you can confirm that for me, that'd be great. But let me know if I'm wrong. In your notes, qualities of a good critical thinker: analytical skills, effective communication, research, and inquiry skills. I seem to remember that we covered at least those 3 before we had to break. True enough? Okay, thank you, Lan. That's good to know. So just a little brief review of those, and then we're going to step into the new notes. Qualities of a good critical thinker are the characteristic attributes that critical thinkers usually show or that they display. Good, thanks, Oliver. I got it. Research skills. So analytical skills are one of these qualities. That's the ability to provide logical support for your beliefs instead of having baseless, unfounded opinions. So having something to say in case a person actually inquired further, like, why do you think that's true? You wouldn't just shrug your shoulders and be like, I don't know, come on, that's my opinion. A critical thinker has reasons that they're ready to give, ready at hand, if and when they need to provide a basis for the things they think. Effective communication, another quality of a good critical thinker. That is the ability to speak and write well, but also listening to other people carefully. Those are the main fundamentals of communication: the ability to speak carefully and precisely, the ability to write clearly and eloquently, and then listening to other people, since communication involves two parties. It also involves being able to adjust your style of communication to the setting at hand, being more or less formal, more or less personal, depending on the context of the situation. Okay, and then the last one from last week were the research skills. That's the ability to have the capability to gather, evaluate, and compile evidence for the purposes of some kind of research, whether that's personal, professional, academic, or whatever. It means you know where to find the relevant information on the topic, that you can distinguish between fact and fiction, what's reliable and unreliable evidence, and compile it together so that you can present it as research. Okay, so we continue now with qualities of a good critical thinker. The next one that we mentioned is flexibility. Flexibility here, we're not talking about like physical flexibility like doing yoga, but that's a nice thing to be able to do. But no, here we are referring to intellectual flexibility, flexibility of the mind instead of the body. And so this basically means the ability to change your mind or plans if and when it's called for. So the ability to change one's mind or plans and being open to alternative views and ideas. Flexibility. So a person who has this quality of being flexible mentally is the kind of person who is willing and able to course correct when it is necessary. To switch over to a plan B when plan A has shown its futility or its lack of effectiveness. It's the opposite of a person who stubbornly doubles down on a failed course of action no matter what. Okay? So if you have flexibility of mind, then you're open to changing course and you're open to new information, making a change of view. Okay? You got to be flexible in life because sometimes the circumstances change and that demands that you change with them. Sometimes people can't possibly let go of their initial plans and they keep insisting on trying to rework them even if it seems completely unworkable and a dead end. So a good critical thinker knows when it's time to jump ship and move on to a different idea or to reconsider the way you were doing something. So you're flexible enough in your mind. You're not so overly committed to your previous views or plans that you just never change them. A good critical thinker will change when it's appropriate based on the evidence or the circumstances. And also another part of being flexible is just being open-minded to different viewpoints. People who don't agree with you, hear them out, listen to their ideas, and consider them with an open mind. If you're not flexible of mind, then you think you already have all the information you need. Nobody can tell you anything. Nobody can possibly give you good advice or counsel. That's not the best way to be. Sometimes the best plans are plan B. Sometimes the most successful outcomes are the ones that you didn't expect at first. So be open-minded and flexible enough to change plans or change direction when you have to. That's another quality of a good critical thinker. Building on that, we have yet another, and that's open-minded skepticism. Okay, so open-minded skepticism, it kind of has two emphases. One side emphasizes the open-minded part. The other side emphasizes the skeptical part. So the definition is basically this. On the skeptical side of things, the person who has this quality will not believe something unless it can be proven beyond reasonable doubt. So they're skeptical to some degree. They don't believe things just casually or easily. They need to see good, solid proof. So one will not believe something unless and until it can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt but at the same time, and now we get to the open-minded part, but keeps an open mind until then. So to be a good critical thinker, you want to, first of all, have a dose of skepticism. You want to be the kind of person who says, wait a minute, though, what evidence do you have, and how do you really know that's true? Can you prove that, or can you show me what the proof would be? So a good critical thinker, they remain skeptical unless there is that solid proof. You know, without good reasonable evidence that goes beyond the possibility of doubt, they will say, well, the jury is still out on this question. I can't necessarily say I agree unless I had definitive proof or something more to go on. At the same time, though, as you maintain this overall stance of skepticism and you demand evidence, you also keep an open mind until then. So you don't like close off any possible avenues of research or any conclusions. You keep an open mind to all those different sides, but you don't commit to any until there's real good evidence in favor of it. Like, for example, take the question aliens existing in outer space. If I'm an open-minded skeptic, I might say, well, you know, I don't know, maybe they're out there, but I wouldn't claim that I really know this or believe it for sure because I haven't seen evidence that can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. At the same time, I'm keeping an open mind. I'm not ruling it out. I think it's possible, but I'm going to wait until I see better evidence before I would say for sure. So if, like, the Mars rover, this new one, the Perseverance, right, if it starts beaming back, and it very well could do this, right, if it starts beaming back microscopic footage or photography of little paramecium floating around in a body of water over there, then we would say now we actually have clear evidence. So now it's outside the realm of speculation. There's proof. Until the proof comes, though, the open-minded skeptic does have an open mind. They say, you know, I'm open-minded to this possibility, but I still need proof of a substantial kind before I would claim that that's part of my own belief system. Okay, so critical thinkers, they're very picky and choosy about what they believe. They're willing to believe things, but only based on really good evidence. At the same time, though, they have enough of an open mind to say, let's just consider all those possibilities and wait for the best evidence until we claim which one we think is true. So say hi to Peachy. She's back. You know, she's always in the mix. Good girl, Peach. Yeah. So that's open-minded skepticism. Now, in discussions of skepticism, there's this famous philosopher of the early modern era that's often referred to. So I'm going to give you guys a little discussion of this man whose name is René Descartes. Okay, Teachy, are you good with that? So let's do this. So this is kind of like a sidebar to open-minded skepticism. It's not a separate quality of a good critical thinker, but it's something that gives further detail and discussion of what it is to be an open-minded skeptic. So bear with me as I briefly talk to you about René Descartes. This is also mentioned in the book as well. Good girl, Peach. Okay, so I will remove her from the board, you know, unless she wants to lay down, Peachy. Sometimes if I just pacify her a little bit, she'll just stay laying down like that. Good girl, Peach? Yeah. Okay, so qualities of a good critical thinker. We said open-minded skepticism. This is a historical philosopher figure who is often associated with the concept of skepticism. So his name is René Descartes, and he lived from 1596 to 1650. He's a French philosopher from Paris. And let me talk to you about the time that he lived in. This time period is the beginnings of the 17th century, the first half of the 17th century. It's widely known in some circles as the Age of Reason. And here's why. Because it's closely following the Renaissance period in Europe. And we're starting to see major advances in all of these academic fields of study, and all this new scientific and secular knowledge is just starting to explode. So at that time period, we're first starting to learn about the laws of physics from Newton, Isaac Newton. We're just now starting to develop more advanced mathematical tactics, like the calculus is being invented by Leibniz and by Newton. In geometry, we're learning how to use the coordinate plane. And if you've ever heard of the Cartesian coordinates, that's named after Descartes himself, who was also a geometrician and a mathematician. So Descartes, the namesake Cartesian, comes from the last part of his last name. In astronomy, we are starting to develop more powerful telescopes that allow us to observe the motions of the celestial objects. And so we found out that the Earth's not at the center of this cosmos, but the sun is what we revolve around. So we thank Galileo and Copernicus for those discoveries. In biology, we are learning that the most minute element of biological material is the cell. So there's so much that's happening in math, in science, in physics, even in art. We are starting at that time to develop more advanced techniques of realistic depiction of three-dimensional objects by having a vanishing point, and so it creates the illusion of depth. So anyway, Descartes living during that time, and he's one of these prominent intellectual figures in the West. So he thought, while we're setting out on this, while we're embarking on this journey of greater knowledge in the academy and in the sciences, let's try to make sure it's placed on a firm, solid foundation. So think of a metaphor of architecture, okay? Say you have a very beautiful, tall, towering structure, and it's amazing in its visual quality. But if it's based on a shaky and loose foundation of quicksand, then it could easily just collapse at some later time. So now, using that as a metaphor for the structure of human knowledge, Descartes says, we're rapidly expanding this human knowledge. We're building it up like a building, kind of. But we got to make sure that whatever it's founded on at the base is rock solid and unshakable, because otherwise we might later on have to withdraw all these things that we think we know, because the building basically could collapse if the foundation is shaky. So to form a foundation for the structure of human knowledge, Descartes thought we have to find out what is certain. We have to look for certainty. And whatever is absolutely certain and cannot be doubted, that would be the stuff that are these foundation stones that are the base of our human scientific body of knowledge. So he discusses this a little more in a book that he wrote in 1641. So 1641, a classic of Descartes, is called the Meditations. So that is like his classic epic work that everyone always talks about. The Meditations of Descartes from 1641. In fact, the full title is a little longer. It's Meditations on First Philosophy, but most people in the academy just refer to it by the shorthand of Descartes' Meditations, or just the Meditations. Okay, so the Meditations, which he wrote, has this goal behind it. He says, my goal in this book is that certainty that I just mentioned, to find out what is totally certain so that that can be a foundation of human knowledge going forward. He says, if you want to find out what's certain, then you have to use what's known as the method of doubt. Okay, so let's talk about the method of doubt. The method of doubt is like the main legacy of the Meditations. So here's what it says. He says, if you want to find out what's certain, then this method is how you will find that out. The method tells you to assume to be false anything and everything that can even possibly be doubted at all. Okay, so assume to be false anything that can possibly be doubted. Anything and everything that can even possibly be doubted. So let's understand what that means. He's saying here that if there's even like a faint, very low likelihood chance that something could be false, even if it's not very likely, but even just possible that it's false, then let's assume that it is, okay? And then we'll move on to the next until we find something in our belief system that cannot be false. So the method of doubt is to expose each belief to the highest level of scrutiny possible. And if there's even one tiny little fraction of a chance that it could be wrong, even if it's a remote possibility, let us just then, at least for the moment, assume that it's false, and then continue on in the same way until the method leads us to something that cannot be false, okay? Now, when I was a student in college, a long time ago now, I was over at UCLA, and I had a good professor teaching me this stuff, and he gave me this little metaphor, so let me pass it down to you, I guess. He said, So like suppose that you're out at the grocery store and you're trying to pick out an apple from the produce area, and there's a big bin with a bunch of apples in it, right? Now suppose that this is a journey for the perfect apple. You're trying to find like an unblemished, ideal specimen of apple. So if there's any little defect or flaw at all, you're going to set that one aside and go on to the next until you find the one that's unblemished and just a perfect specimen. So you go into the barrel, bin, whatever, you pull out an apple, you're like, this is it. It looks perfect. But as you carefully inspect it and turn it around, you notice, wait, there's one tiny little bruise, one tiny little blemish on this apple. So it's close, but it's not 100%. So I set it aside and I go through the same cart until I eventually find that perfect, pristine specimen. Now, okay, the method of doubt, it's not picking apples out of a bin, but what it is going through the beliefs in your belief system, exposing them to the light of scrutiny and doubt, and if there's any chance that they're wrong, assume they are false, set them to the side, and on to the next until you get to something in your belief system that cannot be doubted and can't be false. And then that would be the certainty that we're all looking for in this book. Now, it's good to have a healthy dose of skepticism and doubt. That's, I think, the takeaway for us today. But we probably would not go to the far extremes of doubt that Descartes did in the Meditations. So let me explain how far he does go with it. So one thing I bet you that you don't doubt right now is that you're watching a lecture on YouTube, right? But is there any possible way that that could be wrong? Okay, what would be what would be the scenario that would have to be going on for you to be incorrect right now about your thought that you're watching a lecture on YouTube? How could that possibly be wrong? If what? Let me know in the chat. How could it possibly be false that you're watching a lecture right now on YouTube? Like wherever you're at, in your room or in your home. Because I know you think that's what's happening, but what could possibly be the case if, just suppose for the sake of discussion, that you were wrong about that? How could you be wrong right now about your current status that you're watching this lecture on YouTube? Let me know. What would it have to be? How could you be wrong? Okay, good. Thank you, Oliver. So if you were dreaming, right? If you're dreaming right now, then everything you think you're experiencing could potentially be false. And that's what he says. He says everything that you've discovered through the five senses, well, I don't know about that one, Lan. I mean, it'd be hard for you to think that you aren't you. I mean, that's a very confusing thought. But yes, I mean, the possibilities of doubt are pretty far reaching. So consider the case of the dream. When you have dreams, then oftentimes the dream seems like it's reality, right? Have you ever had one of those dreams where something is happening and you're kind of almost startled when you wake up and realize that it was all just not real? That happens to me all the time. Sometimes, sad to say, the more disturbing dreams are the ones that I remember more vividly. Like, so in a dream, I'll be driving or something, kind of like what happened to Tiger Woods today. And like in the dream, I'll be, on like a high overpass and oops, I swerved for some reason and now I'm careening off the side and I'm facing my death. And in the dream, it's a horrifying moment. You're like, I can't believe this is the end. Then I wake up and it's like, good, that was not real. I have more life to live. So those things happen. Sometimes it's less consequential. I have a dream where I'm teaching a class and I'm up in front of the class and I kind of forget what I'm saying and it's kind of embarrassing. Then I wake up and I realize, okay, there's no classroom anyway. We're during COVID, but that was not real. But while it's happening, you think it's real, okay? So suppose that right now, this experience that you think you're having in reality is all just happening while you're dreaming. If that was the case, then the things that you think are real wouldn't be real. So you couldn't necessarily trust anything that you see, taste, touch, hear, or smell with your five senses because it could all be formed within a big dream. And if you want a different example than dreams, which is what Descartes refers to, in the more modern genre of science fiction, there's like the Matrix, like a simulation type of scenario. So maybe right now you're living in the Matrix, or the world is a simulation and the programmers are just like, let's throw a pandemic at them and see how fun that simulation is. Anyway, these are far out possibilities. I know that you wouldn't take these too seriously, but Descartes, with the method of doubt anyway, says you can't guarantee that that's false because you might be thinking, well, when I have a real dream, it's very vague and it's not as clear as how this is, so this can't be a dream. But if your whole life has been a dream, then you'd have nothing to compare the clarity and vividness that this experience has with. So in that case, You would not even know what waking life is yet. What is one thing, though, that even the method of doubt cannot cause us to lose confidence in? Because that's what he says. There's this one thing, though. It's nothing from the five senses, because that could all be dream imagery. But there's one thing he says that is certain for sure, and nobody can doubt this, because it wouldn't even make sense to doubt it. Anybody have a guess as to the one thing that survives the method of doubt? Because that is that foundation stone that he's looking for. He gets to this in chapter 2 of his book. But you can probably, I hope, just deduce what it is. What is one thing that can't be doubted? Right now, you can't doubt it. What could it be? Let's see, just give it an attempt. Okay, Nathan, that you're alive? Yeah, well, basically correct, yes. Philip, when you say reality, no, there's no reality. It's all a dream, right? And so I like your comment. I always forget the name that is associated with 29, but anyway, 29, the act of doubting. The act of doubting itself is something that is, of course, happening. And because that is happening, then you know that you exist. Nathan, you say you are alive. Alive might call to mind that there's like a body and a physical organism. It could be, though, that you're really just a ghost or a mind that has no body or any dimensions physically, and you're dreaming the dream body. But anyway, that you exist, that you are thinking would be another good way to put it, right, Nathan? And so one thing that no one can doubt, at least respective of their own individual person, is that you exist. So do you follow me? You can't doubt your own existence, because it would kind of be a contradiction to say that. If you doubt anything, if you're even considering whether you exist or not, then clearly you're thinking of something. And only a thing that exists can think. So this is the basis of a famous quote from Descartes. Has anybody ever heard this quotable quote from philosophy? Maybe someone has. If so, throw it into the chat. I would like to see if anyone can assess what I'm referring to or hinting at. There's this famous quote from Descartes' Meditations, something along the lines of, I blank, therefore blank. Do you know the quote? Because it's directly relevant to this little conversation that we're just now having. It's the one thing you can't doubt. And it's what statement? Maybe? Anybody? I think, therefore I am. That's right. This kind of is almost similar to a Billie Eilish song title. She's definitely cribbing from the Meditations. It's like a philosophical reference. But I think, therefore I am. That's the quote of Descartes. And what it means is, because I am thinking, therefore, in conclusion, I know I exist. Even if everything else doesn't exist, even if everything else around me is a big illusion or dream, there's someone having the dream at a minimum, me. So if nothing else, I exist, and that's something that is certain for sure. Now, according to the method of doubt, do you know, for example, that I exist, Dr. Vulish? Let me know the answer to that one. If you follow the method of doubt anyway, and you adhere to this method, would you say that the existence of your Professor Vulish is certain or no? Who do you know to exist? You said you, but what about me? Let's see if you can think your way through to this answer. Yeah, you don't know if I exist or not. And why? Because, well, you don't have access to my consciousness. You're just an observer of me. I'm a third person relative to you. Relative to you, you're the first person. So the only one person whose consciousness you can verify, because you're the one having it, is your own. All the other members of the world could possibly be figments of your imagination or dream characters. Like you've had dreams, right, where you interact with other people in the dream. But notice that when that happens, that's not a real interaction with anybody. It's just you basically dealing with a figment of your own mind. So I guess you can't definitively rule out that any other minds don't exist, but at least yours does. Now, in the end, Descartes' book takes a long path back to common sense. So he doesn't just end it there like, yeah, you're dreaming, the world isn't real, so how about that? Don't misunderstand it. He says that that's possible, but once he thinks he's established a certain knowledge that you, the individual, exist, he thinks that a series of further reflections will get you back to everyday common sense, that reality is real, that there are other people in it, that the things you perceive are generally how they objectively are in reality. But he doesn't want to just take those things for granted like we always do. He wants to be able to prove it, he thinks, through a deliberate course of argument. So if you ever take a full course of study in philosophy, you'll probably learn a little bit more about Descartes, where it's studied in greater detail. And so I won't be able to give you all the basic little details of how he gets back to common sense in the end, but it's something like this, just for a quick note. He says, well, you know you exist. Even the method of doubt can't touch that. Like, your knowledge of your own existence is certain because I think, therefore I am. From there, he says, well, you've got ideas in your mind. One of them is the idea of God. And he says this idea of God is too great for it to be coming from anywhere other than a supreme being. So there actually must be God. So from the knowledge that you exist and from the idea you have of God, he thinks God must exist. And then from there, he says, that's what unlocks all the rest. Because knowing that God exists, he's basically too good and perfect to deceive us all the time. And so he would not have set us up to have a big illusion, and therefore we can trust and believe that our senses are basically accurate. That's a weird kind of argument. I'm not saying I agree with it or anything, but that's Descartes' classical argument in the Meditations. Now, Philip, you say, this reminds me of the short story, The Egg, where you are everybody that has ever existed. That sounds like a fascinating story. I'd like to actually read that one, so maybe I'll look it up after this, unless you know more about like the author. Cool. Okay, guys, so look, a little bit of discussion about the method of doubt, the figure of Descartes, his Meditations, and how that is sometimes a touchstone that people refer to in philosophy when we talk about the topic of skepticism and doubt. In our everyday lives, we're not going to take doubt to the extremes of Descartes. I hope you're not going to walk away thinking, is reality real? But what you should do, though, is have some reasonable degree of skepticism about ordinary claims. You know, like, is this report in the media really true? Is this political statement given by a authority figure really true? What's the evidence? Can I do research that verifies this or not? Okay. So another little addition to our overall notes. So we move on to the next thing. Peachy's just splayed out all over, so maybe if I can, is this all right, Peachy? She's too cute, huh? That's okay, don't worry, girl, you're good. Oh, she's gonna start moving. Okay, open-minded skepticism. So the next quality of a good critical thinker that I guess I wanted to talk to you all about is creative problem solving. I'll move Peach as soon as I get this on the board. Hey Peach, you want to just, you think you can chill? Good girl. Okay, creative problem solving. So another good quality of a critical thinker is this skill, the ability to solve problems that arise in life. And so it's a simple definition. It's the ability to come up with imaginative solutions to complex problems. All right, Peachy, I'm sorry. I just can't chill. Here you go. Okay, so good critical thinkers, among the other qualities and skills that they have the ability to solve problems. And what is it to be a creative problem solver? Well, one part of it is being able to anticipate when problems could arise in the future and having contingency plans developed just in case. So say you're a good critical thinker and you're about to take a long road trip or something. You're thinking in advance, well, what if the car were to break down? Or what if I got a flat tire? Or if I ran out of gas in a remote area? So if such a thing were to happen along the way, it wouldn't be the first time that they thought about it, like, oh, panic, all of a sudden something went wrong. I never anticipated it. They think through the possibilities, even if it's sometimes a little bit of a bummer to consider these possibilities. They think through what could happen and they plan appropriately in advance so that there's a system in place ready to go just in case. So they might bring a spare tire or a gas can. And that means that they've already anticipated these contingencies. Another aspect of being a creative problem solver is, well, sometimes the problems that arise can't be anticipated because they're unforeseeable or they just happen so suddenly that even the best careful planner couldn't have seen that. Well, if you're a good critical thinker, even in that situation, you can quickly assess the situation, develop a reasonable and effective strategy for solving it, and then act towards the solution. So good critical thinkers can solve problems, and in life, all of us face problems at some point, whether they're large or small, long-term or short-term. So you want to be the kind of person who knows that you can rely on yourself to get out of these difficult situations if and when they arise. Don't just hope for good luck all the time and never take thought of what might happen if things do go wrong. It's a highly marketable skill. You know, companies, businesses, firms, they want people that can help them solve problems relative to their business model or their sales performance or whatever the case might be. In the book, they give a couple of examples of when I guess creative problem solving wasn't really seen, just to give you a sense of how much is on the line when we don't do this very well. They gave the reference of the Fukushima nuclear reactor meltdown from, I think, 2011. Back then in Japan, there was a big tsunami wave that happened because of an earthquake. And due to the size and force of these waves, it ended up compromising and breaching the walls of a nuclear reactor in Fukushima in Japan. This ended up causing the meltdown of the reactor, and now because of that, there's an uninhabitable zone like 50 miles around it while the radioactive material decays, and you can't even send anything in there to clean it up or to provide security except for robots and stuff. So why is this an example of a failure of creative problem solving? Because there was a lot of knowledge for a long time before this that tsunami waves were a possibility in the region. In fact, there's a lot of classical woodblock print type of Japanese art that depicts just such scenes in the artwork going back centuries. So everybody knew that it was possible for this to happen. You would have thought then that protocols should have been considered in terms of where this reactor was placed, or maybe better fortification of its walls or structural integrity. So a failure of creative problem solving there left us with a problem that takes a long time to fix, and it's no easy solution. A little more close to home, they also referenced the Hurricane Katrina disaster from 2005 here in the United States. There were a lot of public policy and architectural journal papers being published before this event that said people should think of reinforcing and fortifying the levees that are holding back water because they're liable to break down if we had a significant weather impact. But those calls and warnings were not heeded, and of course when the Hurricane Katrina hit, it overwhelmed those levees, causing significant death, damage, and property destruction. So even more up to date, and this isn't in the book, but it's on my mind. If in Texas we had winterized these homes and reinforced the power grid in light of the possibility that there could be significant winter storms, then maybe so many people wouldn't be displaced out of power or heat right now. Or in the case of the pandemic, there was a pandemic response plan that was left by the prior administration, anticipating the possibility of an outbreak of such a virus as the coronavirus. But the plans were ignored by the incoming administration, hoping for, good hope or whatever, just good luck. And so now we're living with the horrible results of that, and 500,000 dead. So anyway, creative problem solving, good critical thinkers have this as another one of the qualities that they bear. And you can see by some of these examples how important that can be to everyday life, but also to the bigger picture. Okay, so after creative problem solving, I'm just going to mention one more of these qualities of a good critical thinker, and that's collaborative learning. Okay, so collaborative learning is this. It's being able to work cooperatively, working well with other people to come up with shared solutions to common problems. So working in a spirit of cooperation with others and finding their input and contributions to solving problems. So okay, so a good critical thinker knows how to work well with other people to find shared solutions to whatever the problems that we face together are. this is the difference between being a person who's willing to take other people's input, advice, and suggestions and take those on board, as opposed to a person who kind of standoffishly refuses to take anyone else's counsel, advice, or words of wisdom. So, some people stubbornly refuse input from other people. They think they know better, and they think that their own powers of judgment or problem solving are superior to others. But here's the thing. Sometimes you're the smartest person in the room, and that's a good thing. But even if you are, there are oftentimes things that you don't know or that you can't have experienced from your own point of view or from your own perspective. So it always benefits you. Even if you think you have nothing to learn from other people, you know better, whatever, it always helps you to hear people out and to understand their side of the issue or the situation, whatever it is. There's an old proverb or saying. In the previous class, I mentioned this, and one of my students said that this has to do with an old Chinese proverb or something. So maybe that is true. I think it is. According to this little story, imagine that there's a bunch of blind people, and they're all able to use touch to feel a different part of a big elephant or something. Well, one person may be able to feel the ivory tusk, and another person can feel the brush-like quality of the tail. Another person feels the tough, leathery surface of its hide or whatever. Only by comparing their different experiences together can they put all these things together and understand the larger picture that they're all surrounding an elephant. So sometimes the limitations of your own experience, circumstances, etc., prevent you from having a full appreciation of all of the information that's out there. So you always want to try your best to hear other people out, hear a diverse set of perspectives, because oftentimes there's problems that we can't solve by ourselves that we have to do cooperatively, working in a social system with other people. We couldn't have put anyone on the moon with one person just working out of their garage on technology, or we couldn't have invented all the great technological feats, transportation systems, telecommunication systems, if people were just hunter-gatherers working by themselves and fending for their own family. People working in cooperative settings with each other is what really drives human innovation and the human race forward. So we got to be good critical thinkers that are willing to work with others. Okay, so those are the qualities of a good critical thinker. Now we've finished up that part of the notes. After this, there's a little discussion about what are some of the benefits of being a good critical thinker. Okay, so basically the question what's in it for me? How will I benefit? How does it stand for my self-interest to be a good critical thinker? Okay, so we've talked a lot about being a good critical thinker, and it's not just to impress other people or to make their lives easier and it's just a burden on you. No, you want to be a critical thinker primarily because of the benefit that you derive from it individually. So there's a lot of self-interest bound up with being a good critical thinker. It puts you at an advantage and it really gives you an edge. And so here are some of the ways that you get benefits from it. One, and these are all mentioned in the book, is that it really does seem to promote a person's healthy self-esteem and personal confidence. So that's one of the benefits, personal confidence and self-esteem. Okay, so let's see. How would you imagine that being the kind of person who is a good critical thinker, the kind of person who can understand arguments and make good, reasonable arguments, the kind of person who can understand how to solve problems and face obstacles in a rational, clear-headed way. What is it about that set of skills that you think might make a person feel a little more confident, self-assured, not so given to panic or anxiety? What is it, if anything, just think about it, what do you think that being a good critical thinker has to do with having more self-confidence and self-esteem? What could that be? What could be the reason? What's the connection there? Why would it be that if you feel like you're a capable decision maker, good at weighing evidence and argument, that this places you in a greater state of self-confidence and self-esteem. Why? Why would being a good critical thinker promote this? Let's see if you have a view. Like, why would it make you feel better about yourself and more confident in yourself to be a good critical thinker, as opposed to a person who struggles with processing information, making decisions? Okay, good, that's right. Because you're independent. If you're a good critical thinker, then you know that when problems arise or when situations get difficult, that you'll be the kind of person who can capably come up with an effective solution to the problem. So when you're a poor critical thinker, you have bad reasoning skills, then you can easily become overwhelmed even by small obstacles and difficulties that we face in life. You know, if one thing doesn't go as you had assumed and you're a poor critical thinker, the next thing that you have to do is try and find someone else that can help you out. So you start looking for resources, looking for assistance, looking for advice. When you're the good critical thinker, you're the kind of person who receives a request for help from other people instead of the kind of person who casts about in every direction looking for it. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't rely on each other. We should do that. But you're a little more self-reliant when you're a good critical thinker because you know that you have competent powers of judgment and they're not easily tricked, deceived, or the victim of false and unreliable information or poor reasoning. So, Ryan, you also say you have more evident proof. Yeah, you have the courage of your convictions because you can back yourself up. That gives you self-confidence. Lan, you say you're not afraid of being swayed by people's opinions. Also true. You know, you don't have the insecurity that comes with fear of having a change of view. You know that you're just going to follow evidence wherever it leads, and that sometimes that allows you to have differences of opinion, and that's okay. So that's true. And in fact, the textbook mentions that there's some amount of scientific research which tends to confirm this. It seems like studies have borne out that people with higher levels of cognitive ability and reasoning ability is correlated with lower levels of depression, rage, and higher levels of self-esteem. You can think more rationally, you can think more clearly, you're not as affected by, let's say, emotional factors when you have to make careful decisions. So here's just a little in the book to add to the discussion in the class. It says, some psychologists and psychiatrists believe that irrational beliefs and poor critical thinking skills contribute to many of the problems of life, such as depression, rage, and low self-esteem. While depression can have a biochemical component, poor critical thinking skills can aggravate or even be a major factor in some types of situational depression, where a person feels overwhelmed and unable to cope or make a decision in a certain set of circumstances. In a 2014 survey by the American College Health Association, 28% of college students reported that at least once during the past year they felt so depressed that it was difficult to function. Since people tend to become better at reasoning and problem solving as they get older, it is not surprising that depression rates seem to decline beginning at around age 30, if you just look at statistical tables. Compared to people over the age of 60, 18 to 29-year-olds are 70% more likely to experience depression. So if you want to be free of depression, anxiety, self-doubt, feeling overwhelmed by the choices and decisions that you have to make as you go through life, then being a good critical thinker could be a great asset to you because you know that you can rely on yourself, you know that you can solve problems, you don't panic or become overwhelmed at the first sight of difficulties. So that's one point in favor of being a good critical thinker, how it can certainly be a benefit to you. Another of the benefits mentioned here in the book is developing a rational plan of life, developing a rational life plan. Okay, so each one of us is living a human life. You know, your life, my life. Each one of us is living one human life, our own. And when it comes to that life, yours, you want it to go well. I don't think I've met too many people who say, who cares how my life goes? Good, bad, middle, it doesn't matter. It could be anything, it doesn't matter. You want it to go well. I don't think you're neutral on that. Certainly you don't want it to go badly or just meh. You want to have a good, high quality life. But if you want your life to be good, then you're going to have to plan for success. The kind of life that you want, I'm assuming, can't just happen without you doing anything to get there. You have to make plans and you have to successfully navigate all the little obstacles on the way toward the achievement of those plans. So good critical thinkers, along with all the other skills they have, are good at planning things. They're good at setting goals and knowing what all the little steps are along the way to get to those goals. So when you're good at making plans in your life, you determine what the biggest goals are, kind of like at the tip of a pyramid, and then you look at all the things that have to happen underneath that to get there. So like maybe you want to be wealthy and something like that. You want to be rich. Most people probably, especially in our culture, do want that. But if you want to be rich, you can't just say, that's my plan, get rich. You have to have a certain set of steps to take you to that outcome. So maybe you need to get a career established for you to have that wealth. And if you want to have the career, then maybe you have to have some kind of education or training as a stepping stone towards the achievement of the career. And if you want to have that type of education or training, maybe you have to attain a certain degree and get accepted at a certain college. And maybe then, in terms of getting to that point, you have to make decisions about your major or about the individual classes that you will take in a given semester. And then we get down to the planning for your weekly schedule and your daily schedule. So good critical thinkers planning everything out. Nothing's happening by accident. It's all according to a plan. If you don't plan for something, it's very rare that the thing is going to just happen anyway. Very few people, unless you're extremely fortunate, can say this: I didn't plan for any of this stuff, and boom, look, I'm having the best life possible. So most of us are going to have to diligently prepare and work and know how to achieve those plans. Good critical thinkers can set the plans, and they also know how to weigh in the balance of factors their skills, abilities, and talents towards the achievement of those plans. So like knowing how your skills, abilities, talents better prepare you toward the achievement of some plans as opposed to others. Nathan, wouldn't the concept that good critical thinking skills improve your personal confidence and self-esteem somewhat contradict the statement that ignorance is bliss? Interesting comment. Actually in the last hour, in passing, I referenced that famous saying. Ignorance is bliss, I think, is just a false truism that people, for whatever reason, have latched onto. It's really not bliss, because if you're ignorant, then you don't really know, given the definition of the word, how badly you're doing. So I think that a person who's ignorant of certain things is at a disadvantage, and in a way it's even worse because they don't even know it. Like if you're ignorant, for example, of how harmful the coronavirus is, that might feel good in your mind because you're not burdened with all these heavy thoughts of like everyone's going to get sick and die. But are you really better off when you rush out ignorantly, blissfully, just doing your normal life without a care in the world, and then you get sick and you get really, really sick in the hospital? So ignorance is bliss psychologically in some cases, until reality hits you in the face, and then you realize it wasn't so blissful, or at least it isn't anymore. Like a person maybe wants to ignore the fact that there's a wildfire spreading around in their community because it's such a hassle to evacuate. And it's also disturbing, the thought that it could overtake your property and claim some of your prized belongings, or even your home itself. But if you just want to bury your head in the sand, like the metaphor of the ostrich, are you really going to be better off when these flames start to touch your house and you didn't do anything because you'd rather just blissfully ignore it? So, I tend to disagree with ignorance is bliss. Obviously, as a philosopher, I'm not at all the one to say, yeah, ignorance is all good and we should just live lives of ignorance. But I do take the point. It's a famous saying. I guess there's a kernel of truth to it. It feels blissful in a way to just not acknowledge uncomfortable facts, or to not have to investigate the reasons behind claims. It's less work intellectually, but it's not always to your benefit, and I think it's usually to your straight up disadvantage. So that's some discussion maybe to add. That was a good comment. So developing a rational life plan. We've mentioned this, so we can go on. There's just one more of the main benefits to being a good critical thinker that I want to throw in this lecture here. Sometimes I editorialize a little bit, and I think some of the things mentioned in the book are more essential than others. So I wanted to focus on the big three: personal confidence, self-esteem, making a rational plan of life, and then this one, being a good citizen in a democracy. Being a good citizen in a democracy. So we live in a democracy here in the United States. So let's ask a basic question. What is a democracy? What's the difference between a democracy and like a monarchy or a dictatorship or whatever? What's the definition of a democratic form of government? What are the key defining features of democracy as a system of government? What makes it a democracy instead of, let's say, like a monarchy or one of those other forms of social organization? Let me know. Democracy, what is it? What do you think? I mean, you don't really have to guess. You have political participation of citizens. That's right. Democracy is a system of government where power is held by the people. And that's characterized by democratic elections. So yeah, having a say in what happens, that's one way to put it. The people have a say. How do they have a say? Through the electoral process. If they don't like the leadership, then they can vote them out. If they don't like those policies advocated for by the leaders, they can vote them out. In some cases in a democracy, as you guys know, we vote directly on policies and referenda, like say Prop 22, the ride share service proposition that was in the most recent November elections. So yeah, democracy, it comes from the Greek word demos, which means people. So it is literally a system of government of, by, for the people, characterized by elections. So if voter participation in elections is the key defining feature of democracy, then how is being a good critical thinker of service towards you being a good citizen in a democracy? Well, what does it take to be a good participant in a democracy? To be a person who votes, and to be a person who votes based on your knowledge of the issues, and your vote should reflect your self-interest or the interest of your community, right? But what does it take to cast a wise and carefully considered vote? Well, exactly the skills that critical thinkers have. Critical thinkers, as you guys know, are the kind of people who can weigh evidence and arguments and come up with the right conclusions based on the evidence and the arguments. So when you cast a vote, you have to decide between two sides. You have to say, okay, well, here's one candidate or one policy as opposed to another. You have to understand the arguments in favor of both sides of the voter decision. You might want to look at like voter guides and look at the actual literature, which gives arguments for and against. I forget Prop 22, but wasn't it that yes was to force the companies to have their workers be employees with more protections and benefits, and the companies wanted us to say no because they wanted to maintain their status as independent contractors, and that gave the companies less obligations towards their employees. In the end, no is the thing that won. That's just one proposition. But when you decide on how to vote on that issue or any candidate, you have to be able to understand the arguments on both sides. And that's what critical thinking gives you the ability to do. So good critical thinkers are wise to the ways of evidence and arguments, and they make careful decisions based on those factors. So of course they're going to be wise voters that can make and participate in their system in a way that reflects their best interests. So that's another hallmark benefit of being a good critical thinker. It makes you a more capable and informed voter. And that's not just my opinion or anything. As you know, these are sentiments that have been expressed by some of our founding fathers. Like, for example, Thomas Jefferson said that in a democratic nation whose citizens are led by reason and persuasion and not by force, the art of reasoning becomes of the first importance. Democracy means rule by the people. It is a form of government in which the highest power in the state is invested in the people and exercised by them by either the citizens directly or by elected officials. So as citizens of democracy, we have an obligation to be well informed about policies and issues so we can effectively participate. Okay. Now, if you lived in a totalitarian dictatorship, you wouldn't necessarily have your critical thinking skills rewarded because, like, say you lived in like North Korea and you didn't agree with some status quo of the government, you wouldn't be given the chance to vote to change it or to remove some leaders, because in that case, dissent is not tolerated and you'd just be jailed or killed or tortured or something, put in a forced labor camp. So we should all, I think, take heart that it's a great privilege to live in a democratic form of society where we do have at least some degree of control over who occupies these offices of high power and authority. Okay, so benefits of being a good critical thinker: citizen in democracy, self-esteem, personal confidence, and making a rational life plan. Now, I want to also talk to you guys quickly about the 3 stages of the critical thinking process. That's the next part of the notes from chapter 1. Not to be confused with the 3 stages of cognitive development. I don't know why, but the magic number is sometimes 3 in the academy. I guess in like literature, we've got a beginning, middle, and end. Something about concepts that play out that way resonate and are memorable to people. So 3 stages of critical thinking. whenever you're thinking critically, we can understand it going in these three different discrete stages. So first there's experience, followed by interpretation, and then last, finally, analysis. So let me just explain each one and try and back that with some discussion. The first level or stage, experience, that's just when you try to describe what the experience was, but you don't yet go further than that and attempt to explain why or how it happened. Okay, so one describes what the experience was. Without yet trying to understand or explain why or how. Why or how it happened. Okay, I know it's a little bit compressed, but what it says, and I'll just read it so you know what it says. Experience stage. One describes what the experience was, without yet trying to explain why or how it happened. So with the critical thinking process, it starts with some event or some experience. This is the first stage because it's just saying what the experience was without going on to try and explain why it happened. Experiences could be of all different kinds, as you know. Maybe a person, let's say, got dumped in a relationship. So that's just what happened. My partner left me. It could be that you got a poor grade on an assignment in class. Like I got an F. That's just what happened. It could be a positive experience, you know. She said yes to my proposal. That's just what happened, okay? Or I got an A on the exam, you know, or I took my job interview and I did not get it, or I did get it, right? So just examples all around here of random experiences. I got a traffic ticket or something. The experience can also sometimes be one that didn't happen to you, but is just an event in the world. So like you could say, oh, Biden won the election. That's just what happened. So this is like the what of the critical thinking process, just what it was that happened. But when we think about the why or the how, that's when we go to step 2, which is interpretation. Because critical thinkers don't want to just say, hey, stuff happened. Who knows why? Who cares why? We want to know and explain why, because only by knowing why or how something happened can we then have insight. If we don't want it to happen again, then knowing how it happened will allow us to avoid it. And if we want it to happen again, if it's something good, then knowing why or how will allow us to replicate it and make it happen again. So interpretation, this is now one tries to explain why or how the experience happened or the event happened. Okay, so suppose like in the case that I just mentioned, somebody's partner left them. So that's their experience. He, she, they broke up with me. Now, if you're a critical thinker, you continue from there and you're like, okay, but why? Why did that happen? Let me try and explain or interpret the reasons. So about interpretation, you come up with some explanation why. The only issue is this. Sometimes your first interpretation, your initial interpretation, is sometimes a little self-serving. Sometimes it is biased. Sometimes it's formed in the heat of the moment when you're still feeling like either a little bit emotional or you're having a rush to judgment. So like an interpretation of that experience could be, oh, they broke up with me. Well, they're not who I thought they were. I thought they were a great person, but instead they're just mean and cruel. They did this to hurt me. They didn't care about me at all. So that's the interpretation. Or maybe the person did the job interview and they're like, I don't know why I didn't get it. I guess it was because maybe they didn't like my outfit. I came in wearing a pink tie. I just thought a little splash of color would be great, but maybe it wasn't professional enough. Maybe that's the reason they didn't like it. You know, you're trying to explain a reason why or whatever. But here's the thing. You owe it to yourself to take a second hard look at that previous interpretation later on. So that's when the analysis phase kicks in. The analysis stage is just when you go back and you reconsider your previous interpretation and you ask, was that the correct explanation or is there a better, different one? So at this point, analysis, one reconsiders their previous interpretation, reconsiders whether the previous interpretation was correct. Okay, so like, say that the person was dumped. Their first instinct is to blame the other person completely. But then, time passes, they kind of calm down from it a little bit, their emotions subside, and now they go back and they analyze it further and they say to themselves, well, at first I was really putting all the blame squarely on the other person. But if I'm really honest with myself, I maybe wasn't the best partner at times. There were times where I insulted the person, or I got into a fight with one of their family members, or I didn't buy them a nice gift on an important occasion. So I might have actually been part way responsible, at least, for what happened. Or maybe, you didn't get that job and you said, oh, they didn't like my tie or whatever my outfit was. Then you think about it a second time and you're like, yeah, but I also did kind of not come in properly prepared for the interview, and I might have made some errors in the application about my previous experience. So that could have been on me. That's what critical thinking is all about. Now, you're not always going to replace your old interpretation with a new one. Many times you might, but in some cases you just do have good first instincts and you came up with the right explanation in the first place. But you still owe it to yourself to take a second look and see whether or not new information has come to light, or if enough time has passed that your views have changed a little bit. And this is a dynamic and an open-ended process. You can always revisit a previous interpretation at a later time in the light of new information and facts. So critical thinkers just want to make sure they come up with the right conclusions and the right explanations. And sometimes that takes a few tries. And when that happens, you just go into further analysis of your previous judgment on something. Not too long ago, well, it was about a year or so ago, I guess, I had a bike that I really loved. I'm still a little bit frustrated about this, to be honest, but this was a really nice Schwinn Classic Collegiate was the model. It's one of those old fixed gear metal frames, really thick and heavy, from the 70s. It was a classic bike, and I had it for 15 years. But then last year, randomly, it was stolen off of my balcony where I had been keeping it, in my apartment. Now, that's what happened. My bike got stolen. My first interpretation, I was just kind of angry at the world. I'm like, what kind of neighborhood is this? People just come up and steal a bike? How could they do that? There must be, thieves all around. But time passed, and I thought again about it, and I recognized that it is partially on me because I didn't secure the bike. I didn't have it locked. It was just sitting on my balcony. Now, fair enough, though. The balcony is a little bit up, so you actually have to scale a wall kind of to get there. I didn't anticipate anybody taking all those additional steps, but, with a nice bike just on display facing out to the street, I guess somebody decided that they would, take a risk, and they did. Anyway, in life, we want to know why things happen. You don't want to just have stuff happen and shrug your shoulders like, who knows why. You want to have at least a good sense of why, so that when you're planning for success again, you can make it happen again. And if it's something bad, you don't want it to repeat, so you can avoid it. Okay, that's the 3 stages of critical thinking. It's a dynamic process. Now, the last part of chapter 1 talks about barriers to critical thinking. Like, what are some bad mental habits that we sometimes form which prevent us from being the good critical thinkers that we want to be? Because what I've tried to emphasize to you guys is that critical thinking is everything good. It's going to make your life better. It's going to make you a better citizen, a more confident person, better at making plans and succeeding in life. So if it's all good and it just does good, why don't people always want to do it? Well, the thing is, we have these built-up psychological defense mechanisms sometimes that prevent us from being good critical thinkers. Essentially, we hate being wrong. We hate to have our views challenged. And we hate to think that maybe our previous understanding of something wasn't right. So to shield ourselves from self-criticism and the criticism of other people, we oftentimes deviate from good standards of critical thinking. And so these are some of the barriers that get in the way of it that we want to try and know about so that we can counteract them. Barriers to critical thinking. Okay, so first is mentioned avoidance. Avoidance is a barrier where you try to just avoid people and information that conflict with your already established views. So it would be like deliberately avoiding sources of information that don't reinforce your beliefs, or only spending time with like-minded individuals and deliberately avoiding the company of people who have different opinions and viewpoints from you. We shouldn't try to avoid all the people out there that have different views or opinions, or all the information out there that goes towards a different conclusion than the one that we're a fan of. Because at a minimum, when you listen to people from all different sides of the perspectives we have in life, you learn more about what other people think and where they're coming from. So you also cut yourself off from a whole world of experiences, relationships, etc. when you avoid those that don't agree with you. Because we don't live in a homogenous world where everybody's the same and everyone believes the same things. So do you really want to just cut off all the people who are slightly different with different viewpoints? You should seek to engage with those that don't agree. No one's ever been hurt by information. So when you learn about an opposing viewpoint, that's just knowledge for you. That's not harmful to you. That's not a threat to you. So I don't know why people feel so insecure about crossing these boundaries in life and just seeing how different people think and live. But that's one of the barriers to critical thinking that we do see, avoidance. Okay, there's also anger. And that's almost self-explanatory, but I'll make a brief mention. Anger is when, instead of listening to an opposing viewpoint, you get angry at the person who provided the view. So instead of analyzing an opposing view, one becomes angry. Okay, now some people are so upset at different opinions and different beliefs that instead of just listening to someone's view or trying to understand it, they literally will become angry. Like the person starts raising their voice, maybe insulting other people, pounding their fists, right? When you have to resort to an emotional negative reaction because of contrary information, that does not make it appear like you have a stronger winning argument. By the time you're raising your voice, insulting people, getting mad, it just shows that you're not actually in the possession of rational arguments, and that you have to resort to this emotional display to demonstrate how upset you are with the information itself. If anything, that makes it appear that you don't actually have a solid basis of argument and evidence to rely on, and instead you have to defer to this, hysterical display of emotion. So there's no good in being angry at people simply because they don't agree. It's also kind of like attacking the messenger, because why are you mad at the one person who presents this view? In this world, there's going to be millions of other people, or at least a lot of other people who hold the same view. So if you're going to be mad at that one person, then you might as well just go around being mad all the time. And the other thing that's problematic about this is that anger isn't a very good psychological state for you to live with, right? If you're going around angry all the time, then that's a burden that you have to carry with you. And it would be much more of a lightness to your psychology and to your everyday mental health to not feel such anger and such aggrievement at the mere fact that people don't all agree. We will never all agree on everything. So if that's a source of anger for you, then you're going to go through life feeling angry. So let go of that anger and instead just try to understand people. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but there's no need for anyone to become emotionally upset simply at diverse opinions. Okay, so that's anger. There's also cliches, another barrier to critical thinking. So what are cliches? These are like overused common sayings that often seek to end critical discussion. So overused, they're kind of like one-liner phrases that seek to end critical discussion or dialogue. So have you guys ever had a discussion with somebody and you're having an exchange of views and it's interesting and it's thoughtful, but then eventually one or two of you guys, someone in the conversation decides, I've had enough of this. And so they drop a cliche. Like, for example, someone says, okay, look, agree to disagree. Or what's another one that's on the same genre? Agree to disagree. Both sides made great points. Even the common phrase, whatever. If you just say whatever, it's like, whatever. You're trying to indicate to the person that you're done with this current topic of conversation. To each his own. Have you heard that one as well? These statements indicate that you don't want to have further engagement on the topic. Now, fair enough, sometimes you've exhausted the conversation and there's no further point to be made. If that's the case, then perhaps it's not too bad to dip out of the conversation with a little cliche. The problem I find is that people don't do it at the conclusion of a long dialogue. People are so scared of a meeting of the minds that oftentimes they'll use these cliches at the very first opportunity, like, come on, whatever, to each his own. And there's other cliches that are just as silly, like, it is what it is. That's just how it goes. That's how the cookie crumbles. Boys will be boys. When you say these kind of things, you're trying to shut down the conversation. I would say it like this. Don't do that overly much. It's kind of like salt, if you want a little metaphor. Salt can be great if it's used sparingly. It adds flavor to the meal. But if you use too much of it, you ruin the taste of the meal. So cliches are like salt, right? Like, sprinkle them in once in a while, if and when it's appropriate. But don't be so given to them that you're overdoing it, because otherwise it becomes your second nature and your habit. And after a while, you never have any kind of conversation that goes beneath the surface level of depth. Now, there are a couple of more barriers to critical thinking that I also want to mention for you guys and add to the notes, but I'm going to have to send some of them to you in a little Canvas message that I'll deliver later tonight. And that Canvas message will include a couple of the last few vocabulary terms here. Let me just say, with a minute or so that I'm going to leave the class after this, what some of those terms are. Okay, so there's denial, ignorance, conformity. Conformity, that's wanting to do the popular thing or follow what's in the majority just to fit in. Struggling. And then after that, there are different forms of narrow-mindedness, which are also barriers to critical thinking of a different kind. One of them is egocentrism, and that's basically being egotistical, thinking that you're the center of everything, better and smarter than others, so you don't have the right respect for other people. It's not good to be egotistical. It's not to be confused with self-esteem, which is like a healthy but rational appreciation of your abilities. A person who's egotistical has an overinflated sense of their own abilities or worth, and that makes it hard for them to notice where they could improve. And it also makes them easy to manipulate, because if you know someone's egotistical, you can flatter them and appeal to their ego and then get what you want from them. So egocentrism is a problem. Ethnocentrism is another form of narrow-mindedness. That's the unjustified false belief in the superiority of a person's race, group, or culture. So it's kind of like supremacist, racist thinking. Obviously, like white supremacy would be an example of that, but it's not limited to that case. I say unjustified, and that's mentioned in the book, and it is unjustified because there's absolutely no scientific or genetic basis for the belief that there's a hierarchy of the races. This idea that based on your phenotypical traits, like your hair color, skin color, eye color, that has something to do with your innate intellectual abilities is completely false. We know enough about genetics and the human genome, which is pretty much identical in every single person, and the phenotypical traits don't touch those other qualities of a human being. Wherever you're born is going to determine the language, culture, and circumstances of your life. So it has nothing to do with how people look or what race they are, and that's just clearly pernicious and false. But you know, some people are caught up in that way of thinking. So anyway, I just have a couple of those little terms that I'm going to add in a message delivered to you through Canvas, and you can use those to fully complement all the notes that we have for Chapter 1. The quiz that's coming on Thursday will be on this Chapter 1 material and the earlier stuff from Chapter 8, and I'll also notify you in the message of what some of the things to review should be. Okay, guys, well, I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm sorry to hold you for a couple of extra minutes. Appreciate your attendance again. Let me know that you're good to go and that you heard me, and once you start saying goodbye and stuff, I'll close the stream, but I don't want to do it until I got a chance to see you say goodbye or whatever. So are we all good? Just let me know. Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. Take it easy then, and if you need anything, feel free to email me. Anybody seeking their score for the first homework, feel free to email me that, and you'll definitely get a message back in due course, in short amount of time. All right, then, have a good one, guys. I'll see you back, not on Thursday for a YouTube session, but on Thursday you'll take a quiz, and then I'll see you again in YouTube land in a week. Okay, guys, bye-bye then. Take it easy. I'll see you then.